Welcome to Chapter 12. The beginning of Chapter 12 talks about the difference between a job order costing and process costing system. I'm not going to go into those in the video because they're very similar to what we've already covered in class. The difference is that process costing includes an extra step by trying to figure out what moves from one work in process to the next process's work in process. And as part of that, we're going to introduce this concept of equivalent units. Equivalent units are partially complete and are part of work in process inventory. Partially completed products are expressed in terms of a smaller number of fully completed units. For example, if you have two products that are 50% completed, then you would have the equivalent to one completed product. So if you have 10,000 units that are 60% completed, you can multiply 10,000 by 60% and come up with the equivalent of 6,000 completed units. It doesn't mean that we actually have 6,000 units that are completed. That's just the equivalent of saying 60% of 10,000 units. So here we have an example where we're looking at an engineer estimated that 85% units in ending work in process inventory were 40% complete. We need to compute the total equivalent units processed in the extraction department. The reason that we're going to talk about equivalent units is because we need to understand how much of the costs need to be allocated to the units that are completed and transferred, and how much of the cost remains in ending inventory. So we know that we have 500,000 units that were completed and transferred. So that means that they went from work in process to finished goods. Because they're completely finished, the equivalent is going to be 100% of the 500,000. The ending inventory is 85,000 units that are 40% complete. The equivalent of that is 34,000 units. Therefore, our total equivalent units is 534,000 units. The next step in the process is to calculate the cost per equivalent unit. And the way to do that is we look at the total processing cost divided by the number of equivalent units. So in this case, previously in the examples, they told us that we had a total cost of $117,480. This could be made up of beginning plus direct labor plus raw materials that were transferred to work in process plus overhead. So you look at the total costs that were transferred into the work in process account. Divided by the equivalent units of 534 gives us 22 cents per equivalent unit. Now we go back to our previous equivalent units that we calculated. We transferred out 500,000 units, 500,000 equivalent units times 22 cents is 110,000. And then we look at our equivalent units in ending inventory of 34,000. We're not going to do the 85,000 of actual units. We're going to look at the equivalent units times 22 cents to give us 7,480. So now we know that our ending inventory total cost is $7,480, and the costs that were transferred to finished goods were 110,000. This is what the entry looks like. We remove it from work in process, and in this case it went to the next process, which was mixing instead of finished goods. So the allocation of costs between units transferred and ending inventory can be summarized in a cost of production report, which looks like this. So you can see that on the left hand side you have the actual, and on the right hand side we have the equivalents. So you can see the transfer to finished goods in the ending, and then it allocates the different costs. So we had beginning inventory, materials, labor, and overhead for our total costs, divided by equivalent units, gives us the 22 cents, and then the final allocation piece here. So this just summarizes what we just talked about. And then these are just the rest of the entries as part of the process cost. So I just really wanted to highlight the equivalent units process because that's the new concept that we're learning in Chapter 12. The rest is just what we talked about in Chapter 11, moving items from raw materials to work in process, and then into finished goods, and finally, cost of goods sold. Please email me if you have any additional questions. Thank you.